Hello and welcome to episode 3 of MatLab for Dummies. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at loops, what they are and how we can use them in MATLAB. Now on the screen I've got 3 examples of loops. The first 2 are literally just the basic examples of for and while loops, and then the third example is what's called nested loops, which have lots of potential uses, and I've given one of the most common examples on there, and we'll go through that in a minute. But to start, so if we just go down the script from the top, here we just got a simple for loop. Now a for loop does whatever code's inside it, so in between the for and the end, a set number of times. So for I equals 1 semicolon 10 tells the computer to do this for when I equals 1 to 10, and it starts off making I equal 10, and every time it runs around this loop, so it's going to display something if there's more code to do that, and every time it gets back to the top, if I is 2, it knows that it's got to do it for 1 to 10, it goes back up and it increments I automatically. So use a for loop when you want to do something a fixed number of times, so in this case 10 times. And it's just going to output the value of I, and we'll see when we run the code that it increments I automatically. Now while loops, when you don't know how long, really how many times you're going to run something. So a good example is if you were modeling a rocket flight and you wanted to work out air resistance. Well, the density of the air is a variable of how high it is. The temperature of the air, is a variable of how high it is, and the formula used depends on how high you are. So you might go while under 11 kilometers or whatever. I can't remember what the troposphere is, but while under that height, use one formula, and while I is below another height or above that height but below another, use another formula. Such things like that. So you don't know how many times that loop's going to run, but you only want it to be done during a certain condition. So in this case, while I is less than 0. And if we remember from this code up here, when it finishes, I is going to be 10, because it does it 10 times, 1 to 10. So while I is greater than 0, it's going to start at 10, it's going to display I, and then it's going to subtract 1 from I, so I equals the original value of I minus 1. And when we're running a while loop, we need to make sure in the loop there is some bit of code which changes the variable that is the condition of the loop. If we didn't have this line of code here, this loop would run infinitely and never stop, and it wouldn't be a huge problem in this because it's just something quite simple. But I've made the mistake before where I've written quite a lot of code in a loop, not made a line that increments or changes the conditional variable, and getting your computer to stop running that code can be quite hard because it gets kind of bogged up running all the more complicated code. And then finally we've got a nested for loop. A nested for loop means there's a loop inside another loop, and one of the most common examples is running through every element of an array. Now we've declared a 3x3 array here, or matrix, and you can make this go a variable amount of times. If you were to change the 3 to length bracket x, it would do the same thing basically, but we know how big the variable is, so we can just put simply for 1 to 3. If this variable was calculated depending on the input of a spreadsheet or something, and you don't know how long it's going to be, you might change this, but for this to the length of x. But because we know how long it is, it's perfectly fine to do for I equals 1 semicolon 3. Now, as it says here, this first loop loops through the rows of an array, so like vectors I and j, x and y. So the for loop goes through the rows of an array, and this goes through the second loop, j, goes through the columns. And here we've just got some simple thing. If the value, so these are going to have each starting on 1 1, and so this is going to start 1. It's going to go. So it's going to I equals 1, and then it's going to do I equals 1, j equals 1, j equals 2, j equals 3, and then it's going to come back and increment I equals 2. Then it's going to do I equals 2, j equals 1, I equals 2, j equals 2, etc. You get the, so it's going to go through the first, every column of the first row, every column of the second row, and finally every column of the third row. And now this notation here means the value of x, of I and j, so it's going to start off at 1, 1 and end in 3, 3. And if it's less than 5, add 1, and if it's greater than 5 or equal to 5, subtract 1. So if I run this script now, notice here it stops on this breakpoint, and I want to do that so we can, if we first just check that these two loops did the right thing. So here you can see it's looping the for loop, loops 1 to 10 and outputs it. And as we can see here, the while loop loops all the way back down, subtracting that value of 1 until we get to 1, and then the next iteration it will make I equal to 0, as we can see from this workspace here, I equals 0, and it's not equal to 0, the condition isn't I, while I is greater than or equal to 0, it's literally just greater than, so it doesn't display it again. But as we can see, it has carried it out because I is now 0. I'll just put a breakpoint here so we could have a look at x. As we can see, x is clearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now a breakpoint is you can put them by clicking on lines of code here, and it just stops the code before it runs that. Now if I press the continue button here, it will now display x, and as we can see, it has performed the action that we asked. X is no longer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's performed this code here. Those are 3 examples of loops and how you can use them in MATLAB. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'll see you in the next episode.